Hello, welcome to my first YouTube video. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little nervous, uncomfortable about sitting here in front of a camera, but I have a great desire to film my birth story and just share the experience that I had bringing this little guy into the world. As I was going through my pregnancy, I binged so many, countless, dozens, probably hundreds of hours of birth stories, and they all definitely made an impact on me and had a just gave me a spirit of encouragement as I went into my labor. And so with the grace of the Lord, I will get through this, and yes, here goes. So this is my second baby. My first I had in March of 2020, so he's almost 4 years old. And this pregnancy and labor was vastly different than my first. And so where to begin? I was due on January 20th, 2024. My birthday was January 18th, and so, and also we did not know what we were going to be having. And so it was just a great birthday present that was coming around the corner. As I was leading up to 40 weeks, I was working at a restaurant, and it was getting very difficult. My hips were aching massively, and I was feeling just very large, very pregnant, as one does. And so my due date came and went, of course, as they do. And my first baby, I gave birth on the day after 42 weeks. So I was expecting this baby to be late, but I still was just hoping I wouldn't go all the way to 42 weeks. And so my sister had come from out of state. She came from Oklahoma to South Carolina, where we are, and she also extended her trip because she was supposed to leave a few days after my due date, and she ended up being able to stay a few weeks after the baby was born. And so that was so nice. The day before I turned over to 41 weeks, my sister and I went for a walk across the Ravenel Bridge here in Charleston, South Carolina. We made it halfway, so a total of 2 miles to walk to the middle of the bridge and back. And between that and then also the next morning before I went into labor, the thing that you do with your husband to get the baby in, we did that. And you know, as it turns out, it works to get the baby out as well when your body is ready. I'd also gotten a membrane sweep 3 days before I went into labor. I was really hoping to do whatever I could naturally to get my labor started, because I was super ready to not be pregnant anymore. And that might have helped a little bit, might not have. I will say, when I got my membrane swept on that Thursday, I was at a 2, and she thinks she might have gotten me to a 3 during the membrane sweep. And so that was very exciting to hear, because with my first baby, I was 0% dilated at 42 weeks. And so just to have any dilation, and I was also 70% effaced this time around, 3 days before I gave birth. And so that was very exciting to feel that I was already making that progress. Very encouraging. So yes, Saturday morning on January 27th, after my husband and I did the deed, I decided to take a bath. I just felt like a bath. I also moved my bowels before I went to the bath, and I had been actually having quite a bit of loose stool for a couple weeks leading up to it. So my body was definitely getting ready, emptying things out, and yeah, I did not poop in labor either, or during pushing. So that was very nice. That I was empty. And so during that bath, it was about 9:30 in the morning, and I started to feel a bit of contractions. Now the thing is, I'd been feeling intense Braxton Hicks for the last month, and I'd been feeling Braxton Hicks since about 20 weeks pregnant. And so Braxton Hicks were not new to me, and they had gotten pretty strong near the end of my pregnancy. But I would still say, I mean, they were to the point sometimes where I needed to breathe through them. And I just took it as a natural practice to slow down and focus on what was going on and breathe. But I definitely found that they were stronger when I was like dehydrated or overworked. But either way, when I was in the bath, I could tell that these were different than Braxton Hicks because they were stronger, even if just by a little bit, but they were coming consistently. And so while I was in the bath, I started doing this low, deep moan, like a, and I was like encouraging them to come on. And later on, just like probably half an hour later, when labor was like really getting going, I was like, why did I do this to myself? Why was I encouraging this to come on? But while I was in the bath, I started to cry because I was so happy that I was going into labor. I was just so ready for this baby to come. And I'm so excited. I also was singing Amazing Grace, and that was just like a big song throughout my labor. Those lyrics were through many trials, toils, and fears. I don't remember exactly. But as I was going through trials and toils, just the fact that the Lord was there with me was such a support and encouragement. So after I'd been having contractions for about half an hour in the bath, I called my husband to come over, and I said, I'm getting contractions. Will you please wake my sister up and ask her to make me some soft scrambled eggs? Because I was hungry and I didn't want to go through labor on an empty stomach. So my husband, he went and knocked on my sister's door, and he said, it was so fun to hear the excitement in his voice as well, and to hear the smile in his face. He said, Emily, your sister's having contractions, and so will you please make her some tea and eggs? And she claims to be not a very good egg cook, but I think she did excellently. They were very delicious. She also made me some toast, and I took one bite and spit it out because I was not into that. But meanwhile, while she was in there, I worked on getting out of the bath, and I was on my birth ball in the back bedroom, and the contractions were ramping up significantly. I asked my sister to download a contraction app, and because I didn't have one ready, and she did, and she timed 2 of my contractions, and just after 2 it said time to go to the hospital. And so I did not go to the hospital, went to the birth center, and it was a very excellent experience. I went to the Charleston birthplace here in South Carolina, and it was a phenomenal experience. So we work on calling the midwives on call, and the midwife who answered was Emily, and funnily enough, the other midwife who was attending, there were 3 total there while I was in labor, but the other one was Bethany, and my name is Bethany, my sister's name is Emily. And so there were 2 Bethany's, 2 Emilys in the room, one Misty and one Matthew, my husband. And so we made our way to the birth center, and I will say that while I was here at the house, the thought of making it somewhere outside of the house, even though the birth center is half a mile away, it felt like such an insurmountable impasse to arrive at. It felt like such a huge endeavor to move from this location to that. My first birth was a home birth, and I just, it was very nice to have to stay at home the whole time. But thankfully, once I was there, I feel like it probably took me about 45 minutes to settle into the rhythm of labor. By the way, timeline, I was here in early labor for about an hour, starting from when it started in the bath until the time that we made it to the birth center. And then my labor at the birth center was approximately 3 hours. So, not too bad at all. Once we were there, they had a wheelchair for me. My sister asked me if I wanted to be on the wheelchair, and I just was like silent, or contracting. I had no concept of whether I wanted to answer yes or no to that question, but they brought the wheelchair, and I'm glad they did, because we had to go up an elevator. And once we were there, they had the bath ready for me, and I climbed right in, and I was making some intense noises at this point. I was moaning and groaning through my contractions, and I was vocalizing a lot. I was definitely deep breathing, but on my exhales I was vocalizing. And it's interesting, I was vocalizing for, I'd say, the majority of my labor, but there was a point in the middle for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, I'm not sure exactly how long, when I went silent. And because I found when I was vocalizing, it expelled more energy, it cost more energy from my body. And so when I was able to truly go just like deep in my mind, deep in my body, and be silent, I think those were able to be very productive contractions. They were all productive, but they were productive in a way where all the energy was able to stay inside my body, if that makes sense. So I was in the bath having contractions for about an hour and a half, I believe, based on the video evidence that I have. And while I was in the bath, I was moving around to quite a few different positions. At one point I got a leg cramp and had to stand up. That was terribly uncomfortable. So there was something I really wanted to be prepared for when it came to this labor, and that was something Sarah Therese here on YouTube had recommended, and it was the idea of the combs. And so I got this comb, it's very lovely, wooden, from Amazon, and it's specifically meant to be a labor comb. And so I wore it around my wrist like this, and it's got this reminder on it. It's not pain, it's power. I will say it was painful. I want to be careful about how I use that word, because it wasn't a unproductive pain. Obviously it's productive. It's not painful in the same way as a broken arm is, which is not productive pain. But yes, it absolutely hurt a lot. And in fact, sorry, digression, at the beginning, for probably the first hour and a half, as the contractions were getting very, very strong and close together, I really was having some mental doubts, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, why am I doing this? Why don't I get an epidural? Why do I have to do this naturally? This hurts so much. But I had already committed, and I was like, all right, we're gonna get through this. As much as it is terribly uncomfortable, as much as I'm like, why did I do this to myself? And I am truly so grateful that I did. And especially when it comes to the feeling of the baby coming out, which I'll get to more later on. And then just the fact that as soon as the baby's out, you're done and you're free, and you don't have any lingering effects of the anesthesia or, the numbing agents, and I didn't have to get a catheter and overall, and being able to feel everything. I'll get to that more at the end. So this comb, you know, it works on the gate theory of pain, and, you know, in theory, if you're focused on the sensation of this pressure on your hand, then it will detract from what you're feeling down there. I found it to be not helpful. I found that, if anything, I appreciated like having something in my hand, perhaps, but I did not find that the gate theory worked on me. I'm so glad that this is an effective solution for many women, or not solution, but tool. But I found that I didn't want to, I needed to feel everything that was happening. I didn't want, like, there's a reason why I didn't want nitrous while I was in labor. I didn't want a TINS unit. It was just one more sensation that I had to focus on, rather than like changing the focus to my hand. It wasn't like I was able to not feel the pain because I was focused on this. So it was interesting. But would I use it again? I don't know. Like I said, I like having the thing in my hand, but I don't know if I appreciated, because I definitely squeezed it really hard. But I just wouldn't say it was necessarily helpful. Okay, so while I was in the bath, my husband and sister also took turns spraying me with the water sprayer, and that was very, very, very nice, feeling that warm water on my shoulders. Let's see. Also, toward the end of my time in the bath, my husband read from the Bible. He asked me, do you want me to read 1 John or Genesis? And I was like, 1 John. And so I think he read the entire chapter of 1 John, and I was able to be silent during that time. And then at the end of his reading, I had the clarity of mind that it was time for me to get out of the bath, and move to a different position. I went to the bathroom, and I tried sitting backwards on the toilet for a while, and I also stood under the shower. I also laid on the floor of the shower, yeah, these were all positions to just help facilitate gravity, helping me move the baby down and just not be like so buoyant in the water for a little while. And part of what caused me to make that decision, aside from the moving of the spirit, because I believe that while my husband was reading the Bible, you know, God also gave me the inspiration to move out of the bath. You know, as much as you kind of just want to stay in one place because it's working for you, I knew I needed to move labor along, even if it was going to be more painful, because it's painful. It's painful. And so I just wanted to, even if it was uncomfortable to move, I just wanted to do something different, to make things move along. So I got checked a number of times during my labor, and a lot of women, especially when they do the natural route, if they do any sort of birth with midwives, they'll opt not to get checked because they don't, for various reasons. And I really did want to get checked, and hearing what the midwife, Bethany, told me, gave me valuable information about where I was. The fact that I went into this labor dilated made a huge difference, because in my first labor, I was just not dilating very much at all. And I found that dilation was not linear for me in my first labor. And so that was my only experience. But with this labor, I had a much more like standard, traditional, like linear dilation. And that was really cool, because when I got to the birth center, I was, I think, at a 5 or a 6 when I arrived in labor. And after that, the midwife didn't tell me a number until I was at a 9, which I was at a 9 maybe 30 minutes before I pushed. But in between that, she would check me, and she did tell me you still have quite a bit of cervix left. And so even though that wasn't a number, it was enough information for me to know, okay, I have more of a ways to go, and so I need to keep changing positions. One other thing that happened in the bath was super cool, and it was relatively earlier in my labor. I thought it was later, but upon watching the videos and hearing what my sister told me, the time when my water broke was the coolest part of the labor, aside from actually having a baby come out of me. I started singing Amazing Grace. It was very, very slow, and it was low, and it was just, yeah, it was not like any rendition of Amazing Grace you've heard before, but I was singing it, and then I got a very, very, very strong contraction, and at the end of that pop, I felt it so strong inside me. There's no audible sound in the video because it's through the water, but I like felt the gush even in the water, and I felt this pop, and that was just like an incredibly cool experience. And I was like, oh, my waters. And then the midwives came over and checked and made sure the baby was still doing good, and he was. And so after the bath, and then after moving out into the bathroom and standing in the shower, laying on the ground, standing up, and my husband holding me, guys, my husband did such an incredible, incredible job in this labor. I was so proud of him. Even throughout, when I was so focused on everything happening internally, I was so grateful. So a little bit of backstory going into this. My husband is a little bit more uncomfortable with the birth process, and I completely respect that. He is just not someone who wants to be all up in my business when everything's happening. And if anything, he actually has this idea. He prefers the olden way of doing things, where a woman gives birth surrounded by women, and he's not present, but when the baby comes out, then you can present the baby and be like, here is your new son or daughter. And but that is not the world we live in, where babies are born in tents, and there's just like a whole group of women around. I mean, of course I had my wonderful midwives and my sister, but in this world, where my husband is my main support person, he was willing to be present, and I had no expectations going into the labor of him doing anything. I was just going to be happy he was going to be there, but he just blew that out of the water. He was far more than just there. He was present, he was praying over me, he was touching me, he was helping me spray the water over me for hours, and then he supported my weight as I just like stood and held him in the bathroom and had a few contractions there. And I am so thankful to the Lord for giving him such fortitude and just incredible grace to be there for me. So after I was done in the bathroom, I went to the bed and had the peanut ball between my legs, and I went to the bed so they can check me, and things were getting very, 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 I mean, strong and painful. And around the time that I was, actually throughout my labor at the birth center, including in the beginning, I had a few contractions kind of peppered throughout that felt almost pushy, and that was a strange sensation because normally I only had felt those pushing type contractions when I was ready to push my baby out with my first. And so there were just some contractions that felt so strong. I just I lightly went along with it and like was like bearing down. And they were just so intense and painful. But productive. And there were times too when I could feel the baby moving down through my birth canal, through my hips and everything, and that was a really cool sensation. I wouldn't say I really felt that with my first. And so on the bed, I had a few of those almost pushing contractions, although I would not say, I mean, they were not really, but they were. And the midwife checked me, and that's when she said I was at a 9. And that was very exciting to hear, of course, that I was getting close. And so I did decide to get back in the bath toward the end. And I was in the bath for maybe 20 minutes before the baby came out. And so while I was in there, I don't remember much about the time that I was in the bath, but when it came, I did have my hand down. I was like feeling things throughout my labor. Sometimes it was just down there because it was a comforting feeling. But toward the end, I had it down there, and it was such a crazy feeling to just feel my tissues stretching and changing. I'd heard about women feeling things as their baby came out, and I always just thought like that was not for me. That was just not something I was interested in doing. But as it turns out, that's what I ended up doing, and it was really cool. Everything is just super engorged and swollen, and at one point I was feeling down there, and I asked the midwife, is that the baby's head? This was before I was ready to push, and she went down and felt, and she said, no, that's just still a bit of a lip of cervix. And so it's very interesting, the whole anatomy of everything. I'm very interested in what exactly everything was, and yeah, I wish I knew more. But I kept my hand down there, and I was on my hands and knees in the bath, and I never heard from the midwife that I was like there at a 10 or anything like that, but oh my goodness, he can be a loud sleeper sometimes. And so as I was getting ready to push, I did have, okay, with my first son, I had such a strong FER, fetal eject reflex, that he was out in 2 pushes, and it was so strong, and I forced him out with my pushing combined with the fetal eject reflex. And so because of that, I ended up tearing, and I had to get 3 stitches with my son Zephyr. And with this baby, as I was going into my labor, like, I didn't have much of a birth plan, but one of the main things that I said was that I want to breathe this baby out. And so I was asking for encouragement from the midwives and my sister and my husband, to the extent that they were able to encourage me in that time to breathe the baby out. So as it turns out, I didn't need their encouragement. I was able to be present enough to remember to sit and breathe. And the contractions were so strong, but I still had to push. So it's not like the FER was able to do everything. I definitely still had to help, but I waited and I did it with the contractions. And let me tell you, feeling that ring of fire, as they call it, which and the patience that I had to exhibit in order to wait for the baby's head to stretch my tissues and not push along with it, it was, I mean, the most intense feeling of my life. I would probably say even more intense than my first labor, because the first one was like so shocking that I was experiencing that FER after a very non-linear progression of my dilation in my first labor. Maybe I'll tell that story another time. But I felt the most intense determination. And it wasn't just determination, it was anger. I felt mad about how much it hurt, about what a fiery feeling this was, the baby coming out. And you can kind of see that on my face. My husband even told me afterward he saw the determination on my face. I was so glad he used that word, because that's exactly what it was. I was so determined. And it was just like a very strong feeling. I'd say it maybe took 3 or 4 contractions to get this baby out. And also throughout, toward the end of this labor, even though we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, although my husband and I were both pretty sure it was going to be a boy, and indeed it was. But so yeah, throughout this labor, toward the end of this labor, I had this feeling. I gained more weight in this labor, in this pregnancy, sorry, maybe 5 or 10 pounds. So for one thing, I was heavier, but for another thing, I just felt that I had a bigger baby. It just felt heavier. My tummy felt heavier. And the father of my first child was actually a very tiny baby, somewhere around 6 pounds. And I was 9 pounds 12 ounces, and my husband was over 9 pounds as well. And so putting those clues together, I had this idea that I was going to have a baby that was over 9 pounds. And my first baby was only 7 pounds and 4 ounces. And so as this baby was coming out, the fact that it took more work, it took more effort and more patience to wait as things stretched and breathe rather than force them out, it all culminated in me having a 9 pound, 1.5 ounce baby. And I could tell that that baby was bigger coming out. And that's another reason why I am very grateful that I had a unmedicated birth, because I was very grateful to be able to, even though throughout the labor those contractions were painful, I was able to be aware of my body when I needed to stand up to let gravity work the baby down. And that pushing phase, short as it was, I was very grateful that I had my faculties and my feeling so that I could, even though it was intense, I did not tear. And I was also in the water, and so water can also help people not tear as well. But the fact that I had a 2 pound bigger baby, and I had to get 3 stitches with my first baby, but I did not have to get any stitches with this baby, the recovery element was so much better. And so that is just something that I can speak for personally, even though I haven't gotten an epidural before. I know that I was able to feel everything, and that allowed me to exercise patience and get that baby out. So that was very exciting. So after about 2 pushes, and by the way, looking back, in my memory, I thought I was making so much more noise. But as it turns out, watching the video, I was not making as much noise as I thought. It was more just like grunting and groaning as I was pushing this baby out. So once the head was out, I said, "Oh, the head." And so the midwives checked, and they were like, "Yep, the head is out. Now you just have to wait for another contraction to get the shoulders out." And I remember feeling this overwhelming feeling of like, oh my god, I never even thought about the shoulders. I thought the head was going to be the worst part. Now I have to get the shoulders out. But as it turns out, it wasn't that bad. It was still intense, but the head is indeed the biggest and the hardest part to get out, I would say. So then the shoulders came out, and then the midwife said, "All right, reach up and get your baby, because they kind of pushed him toward the front, toward me. And so I lifted him up, and after I was holding him for maybe a minute, they asked, "Did you see what you had?" Because I thought it would be such a ordeal when the baby comes out. I'd want to know immediately, what is it? But no, I was just like recovering from the shock of this pushing experience after the shock of this labor experience. And so my husband and I looked, and I was like, "It's a boy." And my husband has a boy that he brought into the marriage. I have a boy that I brought into the marriage. But this is our first little baby together, done right, as it were. And I'm very, very grateful to have this little boy, because now we get to see what the genetic combination of both of us is. We see what his was in his son, and what mine is in my son, and now we get to see our genes combine into this little boy. And maybe our next one will be a girl. But I was also just so confident in knowing that this baby is exactly what God wanted us to have, and what God wanted to give us, and who he was going to entrust to us to raise. And I also am just so assured in the fact that this is God's baby, and this is God's child. And so I am the mother, and my husband is the father that he's entrusted, but in the end, this is God's baby. And so the fact that it's a boy is just what God wanted us to have, and so I am so incredibly grateful for that. So yes, after a couple minutes in the tub, we moved to the bed, and very slowly, this is little Matthias Wayne Reimer, and he was born at 2:33 p.m. on January 27th, and I was so surprised that I had a day labor and a day baby, because my first came at 3:29 in the morning after 6 hours of labor, and I was so convinced that I was going to have a night labor and another night baby, because I'm aware of how melatonin and oxytocin work together. But it was very nice to have a day baby, because then you get to, we were home by like 6:30 p.m. and I was able to go to bed at a reasonable hour. And so yeah, it was wonderful. It was exactly what, you know, exactly how God wanted it to happen, because that's how it's happened. And there was so much peace throughout. Even though it was intense, I was able to lean on God and trust him so very much. And he was there for me. At one point before I started pushing, I remember in the tub I said, "Oh Jesus, please." And I was really calling out to him, because it was so much. It's just such big sensations, and it feels impossible to get through them. But with his help, and also just the fact that he designed my body to do this in such a perfect design, and though it may be painful, it leads to a very beautiful result. And so yep, everything else was just totally without complications or incidents, and it was very beautiful. So that is that, and thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful day. Mwah.